My father and brother thought it would be funny to abandon me at a desert pit stop. Let's see if he can make it back. They laughed and drove away. I never went back. 15 years later, they showed up at my restaurant with empty hands and desperate eyes. I was 22 when it happened. My name is James, and back then, I was stuck working at my uncle's car repair shop in Tucson, Arizona. My dad, Hank, ran the place with his brother, and he never let me forget that I was just the kid who couldn't do anything right. My older brother, Ben, was just as bad. They liked to gang up on me, calling me a screw-up for every little thing. "Come on, James, even a monkey can change a tire," Ben would say, smirking from under the hood of some beat-up pickup. Hank would chuckle and shake his head. "Don't be too hard on him, son. He's trying his best, bless his heart." My mom, Eileen, would just sigh whenever things got tense. She'd stand there with her arms crossed, her lips tight, trying to keep the peace. I knew she hated the way they treated me, but she never really stood up to them either. It was always the same. She'd look at me with those sad eyes and say, "Let's not make this worse, okay?" I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. I didn't want to work at the shop forever. I was saving up to go to school, to get out and do something better with my life. But until I had enough cash, I was stuck there, getting oil stains on my hands and swallowing their insults every day. Then one Friday morning, Hank burst into the shop with that fake excitement he got whenever he had a new plan. "All right, boys," he said, clapping his hands. "We're heading out to New Mexico on Tuesday. Your godfather Leo's throwing some big shindig, and it's time for the family to show up." I just stared at him. A trip? With these guys? I knew exactly what that meant. 3 days of Hank and Ben taking turns making me the butt of every joke. But I also knew what would happen if I said no. I'd get the same speech I'd heard 100 times before. "You think you're too good for this family, boy? You're not going to make us look bad in front of Leo." So I said sure, because I didn't want to give them another excuse to tear into me. We left Tucson early on Tuesday morning, the car packed tight with camping gear and coolers full of beer. Hank took the driver's seat, Ben up front with him, and me in the back with Mom, squeezed between her and a pile of sleeping bags. Hank drove like he was trying to break the sound barrier, the desert flying by in a blur. Ben kept fiddling with the radio, complaining about the static. Every mile we covered, the temperature outside seemed to climb a degree. The AC barely worked, and the air inside the car was heavy with sweat and stale beer breath. I sat there quietly, counting down the hours. I knew better than to try to join in. They'd just use it as another chance to remind me how useless I was. By the third day, we were somewhere deep in New Mexico, the desert stretching out around us like we were the only people left in the world. The car rattled along a dusty two-lane highway, and every time Hank hit a pothole, it felt like my spine was going to snap in half. They were in rare form that day. Ben turned around in his seat, grinning at me like a cat that caught a mouse. "Hey, James, you see that sign back there? Watch for rattlesnakes. Better not wander off, or you'll end up a meal for one of them. Or you'll be the one running around screaming," Hank added, laughing as he swerved around a jackrabbit that darted across the road. "Might be the most useful thing you've ever done, feed a snake." Eileen sat next to me, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't say a word, just stared out the window like she'd checked out of the whole situation. I didn't answer. I just leaned my head against the window and let them talk. Around midday, we pulled into this dusty pit stop, a sun-bleached gas station with a flickering neon sign that said cold drinks, and a bathroom that probably hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. The place was empty except for an old man sitting on the porch, fanning himself with a newspaper. Hank killed the engine and turned to Ben. "Grab me a couple beers and some jerky," he said. "And James, go clean yourself up. You look like you crawled out of a ditch." I nodded and stepped out of the car, feeling the heat hit me like a brick wall. I left my phone charging in the car because I figured I'd only be a minute. The bathroom was small and smelled like bleach and stale air. I splashed some water on my face, tried to scrub the sweat from my neck. For a second, I just stared at myself in the cracked mirror, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. My eyes looked tired. My shoulders were slumped, like I was carrying a weight I couldn't shake. I took a deep breath and walked back outside. The sun was glaring, and the heat pressed down on me like a hand. I looked around the parking lot, but the car was gone. I blinked, my brain refusing to process it. I walked out further, scanning the lot, the road, the gas station's little store. Nothing. No Hank. No Ben. No Eileen. Just me. At first, I thought maybe they'd driven around the back of the store. Or maybe they'd pulled out to get gas. But there was no sign of them. No sound of an engine. No dust cloud. Nothing. I felt my heart start to pound. My mouth went dry. I walked over to where the car had been parked. Like if I stood there long enough, it'd come back. But the parking space was empty, and the old man on the porch didn't even look up from his paper. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 20. Nothing. That's when it really hit me. They'd left me. On purpose. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty lot. My head was buzzing, and my hands felt numb. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message. You're not part of this family anymore. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty spot where the car had been. My mouth was dry, my head spinning. It felt like someone had kicked me in the gut and left me there to figure out how to breathe again. I kept telling myself they'd be back. They'd forgotten something. Or maybe it was all some kind of messed up joke. But as the minutes stretched on, that hope just died in the heat. I realized they weren't coming back. I walked back into the gas station, feeling like I was moving in slow motion. The old man on the porch didn't look up from his newspaper. The clerk behind the counter, a bored-looking kid with a mop of curly hair, barely glanced at me when I asked if he'd seen a red SUV. Red SUV? He said, chewing his gum. Nah, haven't seen one for a while. I nodded, swallowing down the panic that was starting to rise. My phone was in the car. My wallet, too. All I had were the clothes on my back and whatever was in my pockets, which was nothing. I stepped back outside and sat down on the curb, the sun beating down on my shoulders. Cars came and went, but nobody paid me any mind. Some people gave me a polite nod, others didn't even bother. It was like I was invisible. I thought about calling them, begging them to come back, but I didn't have a phone. Even if I did, I knew what they'd say, that it was my own fault, that I should have been better, stronger, more like them. I sat there until the sun started to dip in the sky, turning the desert into a sea of orange and red. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. Hunger was the least of my problems. A couple of tourists stopped to stretch their legs, glancing at me with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. One of them, a woman in a sun hat and sunglasses, gave me a little wave. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked in that careful tone people use when they don't really want the answer. I almost lied. I almost said, "Yeah, I'm fine." But the words wouldn't come out. I just shook my head, and she gave me a sympathetic look before heading back to her car. I realized then that I was truly alone. No money, no ID, no family. I could sit there forever, and nobody would come looking for me. I thought about all the times I'd let them talk down to me, all the times I'd swallowed their insults because I wanted to keep the peace. I thought about Eileen, always looking away when Hank started in on me, like if she didn't see it, it wasn't really happening. And I thought about how it all led to this moment, left behind in the middle of nowhere like I was nothing. I pushed myself up, brushing the dust off my jeans. My legs felt shaky, but I knew I couldn't just sit there anymore. I walked back into the gas station and asked the kid behind the counter if I could borrow his phone. He hesitated, eyeing me up and down like he was trying to figure out if I was going to steal it. "Look, man," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm not going to run off with it. I just need to make one call." He sighed and handed it over. I didn't call Hank or Ben. I didn't even think about it. Instead, I called a local mission in the next town over. I remembered seeing a flyer for it once, some ad about helping folks who had nowhere else to go. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, patient. "St. Francis Mission. How can I help you?" I told her everything. How my family left me. How I had no money, no ID, no idea what to do next. She didn't say much, just asked me where I was and told me to stay put. I hung up and handed the phone back to the kid. "Thanks," I said quietly. He gave me a half smile, like he wasn't sure what to say. I waited outside until a big rig pulled into the lot. The driver was a big guy with a sunburned face and kind eyes. He introduced himself as Tom. "You James?" he asked, climbing down from his cab. I nodded. "Hop in," he said. "Let's get you to the mission." I climbed up into the truck, feeling the vibration of the engine through the seat. Tom didn't say much, just drove with the radio low and the windows cracked open to let in the cool night air. "You got family back home?" he asked at one point. "Yeah," I said, "but I'm done with them." He nodded like he understood, like he'd heard that story 100 times before. The mission was a low building with a flickering sign out front. Tom dropped me off and wished me luck. I thanked him and stepped inside. The woman from the phone was there, a small woman with short hair and kind eyes. She gave me a warm smile and handed me a cup of water. "You're safe now," she said. "We'll get you sorted." I nodded, feeling something loosen in my chest for the first time all day. That night, I slept on a thin cot in a room with peeling paint and a flickering overhead light. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about what Hank and Ben thought. I wasn't worried about proving myself to them. I had nothing left, but I was free. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds and the low hum of traffic outside the mission. My body felt stiff from the hard cot, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I had no plan, no money, but for the first time, I wasn't waiting for Hank or Ben to decide who I was. I was going to figure it out for myself. The mission gave me a hot breakfast, eggs, toast, and a paper cup of coffee that tasted like freedom. The woman from the night before, her name was Sister, and sat down across from me with a gentle smile. "What's your plan, James?" she asked. I took a breath. "I don't really have one," I admitted, "but I don't want to go back." "Then you don't have to," she said. "But you'll need work. You'll need a way to get back on your feet." I nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." A couple hours later, she introduced me to a man who ran a small roadside diner just a few blocks away. His name was Dave, but everyone called him Diner Dave. He was a big guy with a bushy beard and a voice like gravel. He ran the place with his wife, Vivian. Vivian was a tiny woman with tattoos up and down her arms and a no-nonsense attitude that made you stand up a little straighter. When she looked at me, it felt like she could see right through all the crap I'd been carrying. Dave gave me a once-over and shrugged. "We always need someone to wash dishes. It's hot, it's greasy, but it's honest work." "Interested?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. And that's how it started. I traded the smell of gasoline for the smell of bacon grease, scrubbing dishes until my fingers were pruny. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked the lunch shift, then the dinner rush, watching as the diner filled up with travelers and locals. Vivian was everywhere, taking orders, flipping pancakes, giving me tips on how to keep up. "Don't let the plates pile up," she'd bark. "Keep moving, and you'll survive." She didn't coddle me, but there was kindness under the rough edges. After my first day, she gave me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me in the empty diner. "You got somewhere to stay?" she asked. "The mission, for now," I said. She studied me for a long moment. "You're not going back to them, are you?" I shook my head. "No, I'm done." She nodded like she'd been waiting to hear that. "Good. You're better off without them." A week later, I finally got a little money in my pocket, cash tips from the customers, and a few bucks from Dave. Enough to buy a prepaid phone. I took it outside to the cracked picnic table behind the diner and powered it up for the first time. My hand shook as I scrolled through the contacts I'd written down at the mission sister and the shelter's emergency number. But there was no family listed, no one from my old life. I sat there in the dusty light, realizing that felt right. A few days later, my phone rang for the first time. My mom's number popped up on the screen, and I froze. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. "James?" Her voice was soft, almost sweet. "Oh, honey, I've been so worried. Where are you?" I didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched out, and I could hear her breathing on the other end. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father, he didn't mean to leave you there. Ben said it was all a misunderstanding." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tight. I could hear the words she wasn't saying, that it was my fault, that I should just come back and pretend nothing happened. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said finally. "You left me." She tried to laugh it off. "Oh, James, don't be so dramatic. Families fight. We didn't mean for you to take it so hard." My chest tightened. I could feel the old instinct, the urge to smooth things over, to tell her it was okay. But I swallowed it down. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm not coming back." She went quiet. Then her voice turned cold. "You're making a mistake. You're throwing away your family." "I'm not throwing away anything," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just done letting you all treat me like I don't matter." I hung up before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking, but it felt like the first real choice I'd ever made for myself. I walked back inside, and Vivian gave me a look. "That your old life calling?" "Yeah," I said. "I told them I'm done." She smiled, her tattooed arms crossed over her chest. "Good. You've got a new life here, if you want it." I nodded, feeling something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't looking for their approval. I was just looking forward. A few months later, I found a place of my own. It was a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled faintly of detergent and stale cigarettes. The walls were yellowed with age, and the carpet was worn thin. But to me, it was a palace. I didn't have much, just a mattress on the floor, a second-hand dresser I bought for $20 at a yard sale, and a couple of mismatched mugs. But it was mine. Every morning, I woke up early and walked to the diner. I'd get there before the sun was up, taking the long way through the empty streets just to feel the cold morning air on my face. The walk was quiet, the world still asleep, and I liked the feeling of starting the day on my own terms. At the diner, Vivian had me working the grill more and more. She'd watch me with those sharp eyes of hers, correcting my mistakes without ever making me feel stupid. "You've got good hands," she said once, slapping me on the back. "Fast, Steady. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It was the first time in a long time that someone believed in me, and I was starting to believe it too. When I wasn't at the diner, I spent my nights taking online classes through the community college. I'd saved up enough tips to buy a cheap laptop, and I'd sit at the little table in my apartment, pecking away at assignments about basic accounting and business writing. The work was slow, and there were nights when I'd close the laptop in frustration, feeling like I'd never catch up. But I kept at it. Sometimes, when the apartment felt too quiet, I'd head downstairs to the laundromat. There was an old man who ran the place, a guy named Sal. He didn't talk much, just nodded at me and went back to folding shirts. But the quiet hum of the washers, the soft clatter of the dryers, it was comforting. It felt like I was part of something steady, something that didn't care where I came from. I started to make a few friends in the neighborhood, too. My next-door neighbor, Russ, was a guy in his 30s who brewed his own beer in the bathtub and played old records loud enough for the whole building to hear. He'd knock on my door some nights with a bottle of that terrible homebrew and a grin. "Come on, man. It's Tuesday. Let's live a little." It wasn't much, but it felt like a kind of family, a real one, built on small kindnesses and quiet understanding. Of course, there were nights when the old feelings came creeping back. I'd lie in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and feel that hollow ache in my chest. The one that whispered I'd always be the kid who got left behind. The one that made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'd made a mistake by cutting them off. But then I'd think about that gas station, about the heat and the silence, and the way the car had disappeared over the horizon without a second glance. I'd remember that moment when I realized they didn't care if I lived or died, and that would be enough to push the doubt away. Vivian became more than just my boss. She was the closest thing to a mentor I'd ever had. She'd sit with me after hours, sharing stories about the early days of the diner, about how she and Dave had built it from scratch, about the mistakes they'd made and the lessons they'd learned. "Don't let fear stop you," she'd say, tapping her cigarette against the edge of her coffee cup. "Fear's the only thing that can really kill you, kid." I'd nod and tuck those words away like precious things, because I was scared, but I wasn't going to let it stop me. And late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd walk out to the little balcony outside my apartment and look up at the stars. The desert sky was endless and bright, and I'd stand there with my arms folded against the cold, breathing in the stillness. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, and that was enough. It was a Tuesday morning when I first noticed her. She was sitting at the corner booth of the diner, a stack of thick medical textbooks spread out in front of her, her head bent low in concentration. Her name was Claire, though I didn't know it then. All I knew was that she came in twice a week, always ordered the same thing, a plain omelet and black coffee, and never looked up from her notes except to thank me when I brought her food. At first, I was just another face in the diner, but over time, I started to look forward to those mornings. I'd watch her from behind the counter, the way she'd push her hair behind her ear when she was reading, the little furrow between her brows when she was deep in thought. One morning, I brought her coffee and couldn't help but ask, "Big test coming up?" She looked up, surprised. Then she smiled, small, but warm. "Always. Anatomy this week." I laughed a little. "Sounds brutal." She closed her book and leaned back in the booth. "It's worse than brutal, but that's med school, I guess." "Med school?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "You must be a glutton for punishment." She grinned. "Apparently. Claire, by the way." "James," I said, holding out my hand. She shook it, her grip firm and confident. After that, it became a little ritual. She'd come in, order her usual, and I'd sneak over between orders to chat for a minute or two. We never talked long, just enough to swap jokes or stories about our days. But those little conversations became the best part of my week. I'd find excuses to linger by her booth, refilling her coffee even when the cup was still half full. She'd look up at me with those bright eyes, and I'd feel something flicker to life in my chest. One day, after she'd finished her coffee and packed up her books, she paused at the counter on her way out. "You know," she said, tilting her head, "I've been coming here for months, and I still don't know much about you." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Not much to know. I'm just the guy who makes sure your coffee never goes cold." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Somehow I doubt that's the whole story. I swallowed, feeling my cheeks flush. "Well, maybe you'll find out someday." A couple weeks later, she was sitting at her usual booth when I finally worked up the nerve to ask her out. My hands were shaking so bad. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. "Claire," I said, clearing my throat, "I was thinking, maybe you'd let me take you to dinner sometime. Outside the diner, I mean." She looked up at me, surprised. Then she laughed, a soft sound that made my heart race. "You're asking me out?" I nodded, feeling like my chest might burst. "Yeah, I mean, if you're not too busy with anatomy." She closed her textbook and smiled. "I'd love to." We went to this little pizzeria down the street, a place with flickering candles on the tables and a jukebox in the corner. She wore a denim jacket and no makeup, and I couldn't stop staring at her, trying to memorize every line of her face. We talked about everything, her classes, my work at the diner, the way we both loved bad movies and late-night walks. And when the pizza came, she reached across the table and brushed her fingers against mine, just for a moment. After that night, everything changed. We started seeing each other a couple times a week, our conversation stretching late into the night. I told her about the family I'd left behind, about how I was starting over here in New Mexico. She didn't flinch or judge, she just listened, nodding like she understood. One evening, I told her, I used to think I'd never belong anywhere, but with you, I feel like I might. She squeezed my hand. You already do. A year later, she moved into my little apartment above the laundromat. We squeezed in side by side, the two of us navigating that tiny space like we'd always been meant to share it. The rent was cheap, the walls were thin, but it felt like home. I stopped checking in on Hank and Ben, stopped caring about what they thought or whether they'd ever realize what they'd lost. Instead, I focused on Claire and the life we were building together, one small step at a time. Because for the first time, I wasn't living in the shadow of their expectations. I was living for me, and for the woman who saw me for who I really was. And that was more than enough. About 2 years into working at the diner, Vivian pulled me aside one morning while I was flipping pancakes on the griddle. James, she said, her arms crossed, I'm opening a new location across town. It's a chance for us to reach more folks, and I want you to run it. I nearly dropped the spatula. Me? Run it. She nodded, her eyes steady on mine. You've got the right head for this, and you've got the right heart. My mind went blank for a moment. All those old voices rose up. Hank's mocking laugh, Ben's constant jabs. You're not good enough, James. You're just the kid who screws everything up. I swallowed hard, staring at the sizzling eggs in front of me. I don't know if I can, I admitted. What if I mess it up? Vivian just tilted her head. You won't. You're not that same scared kid anymore. I didn't say anything, but that night, I went home and told Claire. We were sitting on the little couch in our apartment, the one we'd found at a thrift store for $20, and I was trying to find the right words. I'm scared, I said finally. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't handle it? She took my hand and squeezed it. James, you've already proven you're good enough. Every day you showed up and gave it your all, that's what matters. Her faith in me was like a warm light in the darkness, something I hadn't even known I needed. I thought about all those nights spent washing dishes, about the hours I'd spent learning every inch of that diner, how to fix the coffee machine when it jammed, how to calm down an angry customer, how to make sure everyone left with a full belly and a smile. So I said yes. Running that diner was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The first couple months were pure chaos. I was working 90-hour weeks, scrambling to train new cooks and servers, fighting to keep the books balanced. Some days, I'd come home so tired I could barely get my shoes off before collapsing into bed. But I never gave up. Not once. Vivian checked in on me constantly, calling late at night to see how things were going. You're doing great, kid, she'd say. Don't let it eat you alive. And Claire, she was my rock. She'd come by the diner after her classes, bringing me coffee and stealing kisses in the back hallway. She'd sit in the corner booth, her textbooks spread out while I ran from table to table, her quiet smile reminding me why I was fighting so hard. The diner started to feel like mine. I put my own stamp on it, changed up the specials, trained the staff to take extra care with the regulars. I wanted it to feel like a place where people belonged, like it had for me when I was lost and alone. Some nights, after the last customer left and the lights were dimmed, I'd walk through the empty dining room and just breathe it in. The smell of coffee and fresh bread, the soft clink of dishes being stacked in the kitchen, it felt like home. One evening, as I was wiping down the counter, I heard a snippet of news from back home. Hank's shop had closed down. Word was he'd run it into the ground, too stubborn to change with the times. Ben had bounced around a few jobs, but nothing seemed to stick. I thought about calling them, just to see how they were, but I didn't. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I felt a distant sort of pity, like I was looking at people I used to know, but who had no power over me anymore. I had a new family now, a diner full of strangers who'd become friends, and a woman who believed in me more than anyone ever had. And I knew, finally, that I wasn't the kid they tried to break. I was the man who'd built something real, something worth holding on to. 15 years later, life was everything I'd never let myself believe it could be. The new diner was a success, and I'd expanded it again, this time with a small bakery next door. Claire was still by my side. She'd graduated from med school and worked at the local clinic now, always with that same gentle strength that had first drawn me in. We had 2 kids, Lily and Noah, who filled our little house with laughter and half-finished art projects. It wasn't perfect. There were nights when the weight of running the diner and juggling family life felt like too much. But it was my life, and I loved it fiercely. I didn't think much about my old family anymore. I told myself that chapter was closed, that I was done with the ghosts of the past. But life has a way of testing your resolve. It was a Sunday morning when they showed up. I was at the diner early, helping prep for the breakfast rush, when I heard the bell above the door chime. I glanced up from the register and felt my stomach drop. Hank stood there, older and thinner, his hair gone completely gray. Ben was beside him, looking worn out in a cheap suit that didn't quite fit. Eileen was there, too, my mom, her hands folded tight against her stomach like she was holding herself together by sheer will. They looked around the diner like it was a foreign country, their eyes wide with something I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Desperation. I felt the old panic, the reflex to shrink down and hide, but I stood up straighter. I wasn't that kid anymore. I was the man who had built this place from nothing. James, my mom said softly. Her voice was raspy, and I could see the lines in her face, deeper than I remembered. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. I just wiped my hands on a rag and motioned to a booth in the corner. Sit down. They slid in like they were too tired to stand. I sat across from them, folding my arms over my chest. Hank was the first to speak. We're in trouble, James, he said, his voice low. The business back home. It's gone. And your brother. He's lost everything. Ben's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just looked down at the table, his fingers picking at a crack in the laminate. We need help, my mom said, her voice breaking. Medical bills, debts. We don't know what else to do. I sat back, the weight of their words settling around me like dust. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to please them, trying to be enough. And I thought about the years since, about the life I'd built without them, the family I'd chosen. You're asking me to save you, I said quietly. Hank nodded. Your family, James. We always took care of family. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You left me in the middle of nowhere, remember? You didn't even look back. Silence. My mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't try to deny it. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know we failed you, but we're asking, please, James. I thought about Lily and Noah, about Claire waiting at home with dinner in the oven. I thought about the promise I'd made to myself all those years ago, that I'd never let them have that power over me again. I can't help you, I said. My voice was steady, calm. Not anymore. My mom's mouth opened, then closed. Hank's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. You'd really turn your back on your own family? Ben muttered, his eyes flashing. I looked him straight in the eye. You turned your back on me first. They didn't argue. Maybe they knew there was nothing left to say. When they left, the diner felt lighter somehow, like a storm cloud had passed and the sun was breaking through. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, letting the peace wash over me. That night, I told Claire what happened. We sat on the couch, the kids asleep in their rooms, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the quiet. Do you think they'll be okay? She asked, her voice gentle. I shrugged. I don't know, but I do know I can't let them back in. Not after everything. She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, she said, for choosing us, for choosing yourself. I kissed her forehead, feeling a deep, quiet relief in my chest. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about all the things I'd lost and all the things I'd gained. I thought about how real revenge wasn't anger or cruelty. It was building a life so good that their power meant nothing. And in the dark, with my wife beside me and my kids safe in their beds, I realized I'd already won.